The night was colder than death itself, the kind of night when even the wind seemed to whisper secrets. A heavy shovel cut into the soil, each thud echoing like a drum of doom. Elena Carter, 6 months pregnant, gasped for air through the gag tied cruelly across her lips. Her swollen belly trembled beneath the thin fabric of her dress, the life inside her kicking in panic, as if the unborn child sensed the horror unfolding. 2 shadows loomed above her. One was Daniel, the man she had once trusted with her heart, the father of her baby. His eyes were as dark as the earth he shoveled, filled not with love but with cold calculation. Beside him stood Sienna, his mistress, her smile wicked, her jeweled hand resting casually on his arm. Together, they looked down at Elena as if she were nothing more than a problem to be buried. "You should have stayed out of the way, Elena," Daniel muttered, his voice flat, almost bored. "Don't waste your breath on her," Sienna purred, her tone dripping with venom. "She won't last long." The pit yawned open, a shallow grave waiting to swallow a mother and her unborn child. Elena's muffled screams rose into the stormy night, but no one was supposed to hear them. Her wrists bled from the ropes that bound her, yet she fought desperately, her tears mixing with the dirt smeared across her face. The first shovelful of earth rained down on her body, heavy and suffocating. Elena's chest heaved, her lungs begging for air, but the soil kept falling, colder, heavier, crushing. She could hear Daniel's harsh breathing, Sienna's cruel laugh, and then nothing but the sound of earth sealing her fate. Her world narrowed into darkness, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She thought of her baby, of the life she had dreamed of, and of the betrayal that cut deeper than any blade. For a fleeting second, she prayed, not for herself but for the child she carried. And then, just as her strength began to fade, a distant sound broke through the night. The crunch of boots on gravel. Someone was watching. But who could it be, and why had they come at this very moment? Before the night of betrayal, Elena Carter had lived a life that many would have called ordinary. But to her, it was everything she had ever wanted. At 28, she was a gifted architect with a promising career ahead. Her designs had begun attracting attention in New York, praised for blending elegance with warmth, modern steel with touches of humanity. But when she met Daniel, she set aside blueprints and contracts for love and family. She believed love was the strongest foundation of all. Elena had grown up in a modest but loving household. Her father was a history professor, her mother a painter. They were not wealthy, but they taught her values, kindness, resilience, and trust. Those lessons shaped her heart, and when Daniel entered her world, tall and ambitious with a smile that promised the future, Elena believed fate had sent her the man she was meant to build her life with. Within a year, they were married. Soon after, she learned she was carrying their first child. Pregnancy made her softer, more vulnerable. Every heartbeat inside her reminded her of the sacrifices she was willing to make. She left her prestigious design firm, telling herself she would return someday. But for now, the baby needed her full attention. She devoted herself to creating a home where laughter would echo, where a child could grow safe and cherished. From the outside, her life looked picture perfect. Their brownstone apartment was filled with blooming plants she nurtured, baby clothes folded neatly in the nursery, and framed photographs of a smiling couple who looked inseparable. Elena spent evenings preparing meals, waiting for Daniel to come home. When he arrived late, reeking of cologne not his own, she convinced herself it was just the stress of work. When he snapped at her for spending too much on prenatal vitamins, she blamed her own sensitivity. Elena's greatest weakness was her trust. She believed that love could cure flaws, that patience could mend cracks in a marriage. She ignored the pit in her stomach when Daniel's phone lit up with messages at midnight. She forgave him when he missed ultrasound appointments, telling herself he was working for their future. And she carried the burden of silence, never confessing her worries to friends or family. Still, there were moments of pure joy. She would sit by the window, hands on her swollen belly, humming lullabies her mother once sang. She imagined her child's first steps, the sound of Daniel's laughter as he lifted their baby high. Hope blinded her, and she clung to it desperately, refusing to see the storm gathering behind Daniel's eyes. Elena's vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was her belief in love, her devotion as a wife and a mother-to-be. She didn't know that these very qualities would be twisted against her, that the man she sacrificed everything for was plotting her destruction. The cracks in her dream life were widening, and soon the illusion would shatter beyond repair. New York City sparkled like a jewel at night, a city where fortunes were made under the glare of neon lights and broken in the shadows of skyscrapers. To outsiders, Daniel and Elena Carter were part of that glittering world, an ambitious couple climbing the ladder of success. Their address in Manhattan spoke of prestige. Their invitations to society galas placed them among the city's rising elite. But behind closed doors, the polished surface was already cracking. Daniel thrived in this environment. He loved the rush of expensive champagne, the flash of cameras, and the subtle games of power played at corporate events. Every gala, every fundraiser was an opportunity to expand his network, to brush shoulders with tycoons and politicians. He was intoxicated by status, and with Sienna Moore, a striking young PR specialist always on his arm at business dinners, he felt unstoppable. To him, Elena, with her gentle nature and growing belly, no longer fit into that picture. For Elena, those grand events felt suffocating. She wasn't dazzled by chandeliers or designer gowns. While Daniel reveled in attention, Elena often slipped away to quiet corners, sipping sparkling water and rubbing her belly, imagining bedtime stories instead of business deals. She wanted a family, not a front-page appearance. The glittering world that enchanted Daniel only deepened her sense of isolation. The backdrop of their life was filled with contradictions. Their apartment was decorated with modern luxury, Italian marble counters, glass walls, sleek furniture chosen more for display than comfort. Yet Elena tucked small touches of warmth into every corner. A rocking chair in the nursery, watercolor paintings from her mother, little knitted socks waiting for tiny feet. The home looked perfect in photographs, but inside, the air grew heavier each day, weighed down by Daniel's late nights and Elena's unanswered questions. The city outside pulsed with energy, limousines pulling up to red carpets, skyscrapers glowing with midnight board meetings, whispers of power plays carried through private lounges. Daniel belonged to that world, chasing wealth and recognition. Elena belonged to another, quieter world of love and innocence, a world she desperately tried to preserve for her unborn child. But the backdrop of their lives was not just glamorous, it was dangerous. Daniel's hunger for success had lured him into risky partnerships. His name appeared in whispers of corruption, deals sealed over midnight drinks, promises that could collapse everything if exposed. Sienna was not only his lover, but also his accomplice, pushing him further into darkness. She whispered that Elena was holding him back, that with her out of the way, nothing could stop them. Elena never saw the trap closing around her. She thought she was living in a world of dreams, but the city she trusted, the home she built, and the man she loved were conspiring against her. The glittering backdrop was only a mask, and soon it would shatter to reveal the nightmare beneath. Every betrayal has a face, and in Elena's story, it had two. Daniel Carter, her husband, was the man she had trusted with her dreams, her body, and her unborn child. To the world, he was a successful businessman with ambition in his eyes and charm in his smile. But behind closed doors, his charm was nothing more than a weapon, sharpened with greed. Daniel had always wanted more. More money, more recognition, more control. At first, Elena thought it was just drive, the natural hunger of a man who wanted to succeed. But over time, she realized it was an obsession. Success wasn't enough. He needed to dominate, to own. Every promotion was never fast enough, every deal never big enough. And as Elena's belly grew, so did Daniel's impatience. To him, her pregnancy wasn't a blessing. It was a burden that slowed him down, tied him to responsibilities he never wanted. And then there was Sienna Moore. She was the flame that fueled his darkest desires. Sienna was younger, strikingly beautiful, and dangerous in ways Elena could never be. Her career in PR gave her the perfect skills to manipulate and seduce. She knew how to flatter Daniel's ego, how to whisper promises of a life filled with power and passion. With her, Daniel didn't feel trapped, he felt invincible. But Sienna wasn't just a mistress, she was a strategist. From the moment she set her eyes on Daniel, she didn't just want him, she had everything he could give her. The penthouses, the parties, the empire. She despised Elena, not because of love, but because Alina stood between her and the life she craved. In private, she mocked Elena's kindness, calling it weakness. To Sienna, the pregnant wife was just an obstacle, one that had to be removed. Together, Daniel and Sienna formed a poisonous alliance. He supplied the ambition, she supplied the cunning. She pushed him to think bigger, to cut ties with his wife once and for all. But divorce wasn't enough for them. The divorce meant splitting assets, losing face, and enduring scandal. No, what they wanted was clean, permanent removal. Elena and her unborn child had to disappear. At night, while Elena slept alone, Daniel and Sienna whispered in hushed tones. They painted visions of a future where they ruled together, where Elena was nothing more than a fading memory. And each time Sienna leaned close, her perfume clinging to his suit, Daniel's resolve hardened. What Elena didn't know was that her husband and his mistress were no longer simply cheating. They were planning something final, something unthinkable. And soon, their secret alliance would turn her entire world into a grave. It began with whispers, small details Elena tried to dismiss. Daniel's late nights at the office, the sudden business trips that appeared out of nowhere, the faint trace of perfume that wasn't hers clinging to his shirts. She told herself not to overthink, not to become the paranoid wife. But some truths claw their way to the surface, no matter how hard you try to bury them. The first crack in the facade came at a charity gala. Elena, radiant in a flowing maternity dress, entered the ballroom on Daniel's arm. She was nervous but hopeful, believing this was her chance to reconnect, to remind him of the family they were building. The chandeliers sparkled above, the orchestra played softly, and for a moment, she felt almost proud. Then she saw her. Sienna Moore stood just a few feet away, draped in scarlet silk, her hand brushing Daniel's arm with a familiarity that made Elena's stomach twist. The crowd noticed too. Subtle glances, hushed whispers, curious smiles. Elena forced a smile, clutching Daniel's hand tighter, but he barely looked at her. His gaze lingered on Sienna. Later that night, as Daniel mingled with investors, Elena sat alone at their table. She heard the whispers around her. Poor thing. Doesn't she know? She looks so tired. I'd die of embarrassment. She's pregnant, and he's parading the mistress in public. The words cut deeper than knives. She tried to focus on her baby, rubbing her belly for comfort, but the humiliation was unbearable. She felt exposed, stripped of dignity in a room full of strangers who suddenly seemed like enemies. The second blow came days later at Daniel's office. Elena had prepared a surprise. Homemade lunch, his favorite dish packed neatly in a basket. She wanted to remind him of the woman who loved him, of the home waiting for him. But when she entered his office, her heart froze. Sienna was sitting in Elena's chair, legs crossed confidently, typing away as if she owned the space. Daniel looked up, startled for only a second before masking it with irritation. "What are you doing here, Elena?" he snapped, as if she were the intruder. Elena stood frozen, clutching the basket of food, the lilies she had brought trembling in her hands. The secretary avoided her eyes. Sienna smirked, leaning back in the chair that symbolized everything Elena thought she still had. It was a scene Elena would never forget. The day she realized her marriage was not just crumbling, but publicly ridiculed. She walked out of the building with her head down, but inside, something cracked. She still loved him. She still hoped for their child. But humiliation had planted a seed of fear in her heart, a whisper she could no longer silence. If Daniel could betray her so openly, what else was he capable of? After the humiliation at the office, Elena's world began to unravel. She returned home with the basket of untouched food still in her hands, her heart splintering with every step. The apartment that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison, silent, cold, filled with memories of a love that no longer existed. She placed the basket on the counter, sank into a chair, and finally let herself cry. The sobs came in waves, shaking her body until her swollen belly ached. She pressed her hands against her stomach, whispering apologies to the baby inside. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you have to feel this." The weight of betrayal crushed her, but the weight of responsibility pulled her in the opposite direction. She was carrying life, yet she felt like she was dying. Nights became her enemy. Alone in the bed she once shared with Daniel, Elena stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds until dawn. Every sound from the street outside made her jump. Was he coming home? Was he with her again? She clutched the sheets tightly, wishing she could turn back time, wishing she could erase the image of Sienna in her chair, Sienna in her husband's arms. Her reflection in the mirror frightened her. Dark circles under her eyes, pale skin, and a sadness she barely recognized. Friends called, but she ignored their messages. She didn't want pity. She didn't want anyone to know how far she had fallen. Even the smallest tasks, making breakfast, folding laundry, tidying the nursery, felt impossible. The nursery especially hurt. The crib sat empty, waiting for a child who deserved joy, not a mother drowning in despair. But despair is a cruel companion. It whispers lies in the dark. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, Elena found herself sitting on the bathroom floor, staring at a bottle of pills. For a moment she wondered if ending her pain was the only way. Her tears blurred the label, her breath shallow as she gripped the bottle. But then, her baby kicked. The small thump against her ribcage jolted her back to reality. She dropped the pills, clutching her belly with trembling hands. "No," she whispered through sobs. "I can't. I have to be strong for you." It was the faintest glimmer of hope, but it was enough to stop her from falling completely. Still, the breakdown had left scars. Elena knew she could no longer trust Daniel, but she didn't yet know the depth of his cruelty. She didn't know that her darkest moment was only the beginning. Because while she struggled to hold herself together, Daniel and Sienna were already planning how to break her once and for all. While Elena was drowning in despair, Daniel and Sienna were intoxicated by their secret victories. To them, humiliation was not enough. Divorce was not enough. They wanted freedom, wealth, and power without complication. And for that, Elena, along with her unborn child, had to vanish. It started with whispers behind closed doors, in dimly lit hotel rooms where champagne glasses clinked and stolen kisses turned into dangerous promises. Sienna, her lips painted blood red, leaned against Daniel's chest, her voice low and persuasive. "She's in the way, Daniel. You know it as well as I do. As long as Elena's alive, she holds the key to your reputation, your money, your empire. But if she's gone—" Her words trailed off, but her eyes gleamed with cruel certainty. Daniel hesitated at first. He had betrayed his wife, humiliated her, but murder was another matter. Yet the seed was planted, and Sienna watered it with every whisper. "You deserve to live without chains," she told him. "You deserve me, us, without her shadow hanging over you." Soon hesitation turned into calculation. Daniel began researching Elena's life insurance policy, quietly meeting with shady acquaintances under the guise of business. He scrolled through messages late at night, deleting evidence, piecing together a plan. Sienna encouraged him, her excitement barely concealed. Together, they became architects of destruction. Their plan grew darker each day. A staged accident? Too risky. A sudden illness? Too many questions. Then came the idea that made Daniel's heart pound, burying her alive. No witnesses, no messy evidence, just silence. It was Sienna's idea, whispered with a smile as if she were suggesting a new vacation. "Think about it," she said, her fingers tracing circles on his arm. "She disappears. People will assume she left you, no one will look too closely, and we'll finally be free." Daniel stared at her, his mind racing. It was madness. It was final. But it was also perfect. As the storm raged outside one evening, Daniel looked at Elena across the dinner table. She sat quietly, her hand resting protectively on her belly, her eyes still carrying the faint hope of a wife who wanted to believe in her husband. He forced a smile, nodding at her, while inside he had already decided her fate. The deadly plan was set in motion. He would lure her to a construction site under the pretense of a new project. Sienna would be waiting. The shallow grave had already been prepared. And while Elena hummed softly to her unborn child, Daniel rehearsed the lie he would tell her the night he delivered her into the earth. The betrayal was complete, but what he didn't know was that someone else had already begun watching. The night Daniel chose for his plan was carefully crafted. Rain drizzled across the city, blurring the streetlights into streaks of gold and gray. Elena, weary from days of silence between them, was startled when Daniel suddenly appeared at the apartment door earlier than usual. He carried a bouquet of lilies, her favorite, the same flowers she had once brought to his office when she caught him with Sienna. "Elena," he said softly, his tone rehearsed. "I know I've been distant. I want to make it right. Come with me. There's something I want to show you." Her heart lifted at the words she had longed to hear. For a moment, the pain of betrayal dimmed, replaced by the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he still cared. She clutched her belly protectively, hesitant but yearning. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To see the future," Daniel replied smoothly. "The project I've been working on, it could change everything for us. I want you to be the first to see it." The lie slid effortlessly off his tongue. Elena, desperate for reconciliation, nodded. She changed into a warm coat, slipping her feet into flats that pinched against her swollen ankles. Daniel took her hand, guiding her into the car with a tenderness that felt almost real. Almost. As they drove through the rain-slicked streets, Elena gazed out the window, speaking softly to her unborn child. "Maybe things will get better, little one. Maybe your father is finally coming back to us." Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. He didn't answer. The city lights faded as they drove farther into the outskirts, where half-built structures loomed like skeletons against the stormy sky. Elena shivered, pulling her coat tighter. "Daniel, where are we?" "Just a little further," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were cold, fixed on the road ahead. Finally, the car stopped at a desolate construction site. Metal beams jutted into the sky, and puddles reflected the pale moonlight. The air smelled of wet cement and earth. Daniel stepped out, circling to open her door with forced chivalry. "Trust me," he murmured, extending his hand. Elena hesitated. Something in his tone, something in the emptiness around them, made her chest tighten. Still, she followed, her footsteps hesitant on the muddy ground. She believed in love. She believed in him. As they walked deeper into the site, Elena noticed the ground disturbed, as if freshly dug. She paused, her instincts screaming, "Daniel, what is this place?" He turned to her, his smile thin and lifeless. Behind them, a figure emerged from the shadows. Sienna, her red lips curling into a smirk, and in that instant, Elena knew. She was not there to see a future. She had been lured to her grave. The rain had turned the earth into mud, sucking at Elena's shoes as she followed Daniel into the half-built site. The skeletal frames of concrete walls rose around them like the ribs of a monster. Every instinct in her body told her something was wrong, but she clung to the hope that her husband had brought her here for love, not destruction. Then she saw it. A gaping hole in the ground, soil piled high beside it, the unmistakable shape of a shallow grave. Her heart stuttered, her grip tightened on her belly. "Daniel," her voice trembled. "What is this?" He didn't answer. Instead, Sienna stepped forward from the shadows, her red heels sinking slightly in the mud. She smiled, cruel and satisfied. "It's your goodbye party, sweetheart." Elena's eyes darted between them, disbelief clouding her vision. "No, Daniel, tell me this isn't real. Tell me she's lying." But Daniel's face was stone, his eyes void of warmth. "You were never supposed to be here, Elena. You were supposed to stay quiet, small, in the background. But you became a problem." Her knees weakened. She had given him her youth, her dreams, her trust, and now he was erasing her. Tears blurred her sight as the rain mingled with them, cold streams against her cheeks. "I'm carrying your child," she whispered desperately. Sienna laughed, a sound sharp enough to cut through the storm. "Do you really think that matters? Daniel doesn't want a child, he wants freedom, and I'm the one who can give it to him." Before Elena could respond, Daniel moved. His hand shot out, shoving her hard. She stumbled, crashing to the muddy ground, the impact jarring through her pregnant body. Pain exploded in her side as she clutched her belly, gasping for breath. "Please," she cried, her voice breaking. "Don't do this. You don't have to." But mercy had no place here. Daniel grabbed a shovel, his knuckles white against the wooden handle. He began scooping soil back into the grave, each thud like a death knell. The sound of earth striking earth was deafening, drowning out Elena's sobs. Sienna crouched beside her, her perfume sickly sweet even in the rain. "Don't worry, darling," she whispered mockingly. "We'll take good care of everything once you're gone." Elena thrashed against the mud, her hands scraping against rocks, her wrists raw from the ropes they had tied. She screamed, but the storm swallowed her cries. Above her, Daniel and Sienna stood together, united in cruelty, watching as the grave filled. Elena's world narrowed into terror and betrayal. She prayed desperately, not for herself, but for the tiny heartbeat within her. And then, just as the soil began to cover her legs, she caught something, a flicker in the distance, movement beyond the construction beams, a shadow watching. Someone was there. But would they reach her before the earth swallowed her whole? The first shovelful of dirt struck her legs like a hammer, cold and heavy. Elena gasped against the gag, her screams muffled as Daniel tossed another load into the shallow pit. The soil piled higher, seeping into her clothes, clinging to her skin. Every grain was a weight pressing her down, stealing her air. Her wrists burned from the ropes that cut deep into her flesh as she struggled. She kicked, twisted, clawed at the earth with her bound hands, but it was useless. The mud swallowed her movements, dragging her deeper into silence. Daniel's face hovered above her, rain dripping from his hair. He didn't look like the man she once loved. He looked like a stranger, a monster carved out of greed and emptiness. Beside him, Sienna lit a cigarette under the shelter of a steel beam, her eyes glittering with triumph. She blew smoke into the night as if she were watching a performance, not a murder. Elena's chest heaved. She tried to cry out his name, to beg, to remind him of the child, but the gag strangled her words. Panic clawed at her lungs as the soil climbed higher. Her stomach, her chest, her throat. The baby kicked inside her, a desperate thump against her ribs. It was life fighting for life, a reminder that she wasn't alone in the grave. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered a prayer in her heart. Please, let me live for my child. Don't let this be the end. Her mind spiraled with memories. The first time Daniel kissed her, the vows they exchanged, the nursery she had painted in soft shades of blue. She thought of her father's laugh, her mother's lullabies, the dreams she still carried. All of it slipping away, buried beneath the weight of betrayal. The earth reached her neck. She tilted her head back, straining for air, her lungs burning. Her vision dimmed at the edges, the night closing in. Above, Daniel dropped the shovel and took Sienna's hand, their silhouettes framed by lightning. They walked away without looking back. Darkness pressed in, the world grew smaller, tighter. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, each beat slower, weaker. The unborn child kicked again, one final desperate plea. Elena summoned every ounce of strength, her nails tearing against the ropes, her body thrashing beneath the suffocating soil. But the earth was merciless. Her breaths came shallow, ragged, almost gone. She closed her eyes, surrender tugging at her like a tide. This was it. This was how her story would end, in silence, in darkness, erased by the two people she trusted least. But then, through the haze of near death, a sound pierced her fading consciousness. The crunch of boots on gravel. Heavy, purposeful footsteps. Someone was running toward her. And in that instant, a spark of hope ignited. She was not alone in the grave. The world had almost gone silent for Elena. The pounding of her heart was fading, her lungs collapsing under the weight of soil. Her vision was a blur of blackness, and for a moment, she thought she had slipped beyond the point of return. Then the sound came. Boots slamming against gravel, the clatter of metal tossed aside, a man's voice shouting through the storm. Hands strong and frantic, clawed at the earth, covering her chest. Each scoop of soil pulled her back from the brink, dragged her closer to the surface. Elena's eyes fluttered open. A flashlight beam cut through the rain, blinding her for a second. The silhouette of a broad-shouldered man hovered above her, his movements desperate. "Stay with me," he barked, his voice urgent but steady. "You're not dying tonight. Not you, not the baby." It was Michael Evans, the man William Blackwell had secretly assigned to watch over her. She didn't know his name yet, didn't understand why he was there, but in that moment, he was the line between life and death. Michael ripped the gag from her mouth, and Elena gasped, sucking in air like it was fire. She coughed violently, her throat raw, her tears mixing with mud. "Please," she whispered hoarsely, clutching her stomach. "My baby." "You're safe now," Michael reassured, cutting the ropes from her wrists with a swift blade. "I saw everything. I've got you." He lifted her from the grave, cradling her against his chest like she was fragile glass. Her body shook uncontrollably, her breaths ragged. Every movement sent pain shooting through her, but she clung to him, clung to the faint heartbeat still alive inside her. In the distance, Daniel's car engine roared to life. He and Sienna were already gone, believing they had buried her forever. They had no idea she was breathing again, that their perfect crime had a witness. Michael carried her to a waiting SUV parked in the shadows. Rain pounded on the roof as he settled her inside, wrapping her in a blanket. She stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. Why are you helping me?" He met her gaze, his jaw set with grim determination. "Because someone powerful wants you alive, and because monsters like them don't get to win." Elena's body trembled, but inside her something shifted. She was no longer just a victim, gasping for survival. She was a mother, alive, with a chance to fight back. Her lips quivered as she whispered, "They think I'm dead." Michael nodded, "And that's exactly what we'll let them believe." For the first time that night, Elena's tears weren't just of pain. They carried a flicker of something else. Hope. The grave had not claimed her, and now her enemies would never see her coming. The SUV cut through the storm, its headlights carving a path toward the edge of the city. Elena sat trembling under the blanket, her body sore, her wrists raw, her belly aching with every breath. She clutched her stomach protectively, whispering silent prayers that her baby was still safe. Across from her, Michael Evans kept his eyes on the road, his expression grim, his hands steady on the wheel. "Where are you taking me?" Elena finally asked, her voice hoarse. "To someone who's been waiting," Michael replied. "Someone who's been protecting you long before tonight." Confusion flickered in Elena's tired eyes. She wanted to demand answers, but exhaustion pulled at her, dragging her into restless sleep. When she awoke, the storm had quieted, and the SUV was parked in front of a sprawling estate outside Manhattan. Towering iron gates swung open, revealing manicured lawns and a mansion glowing warmly in the night. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and old books. Michael guided her into a study lined with shelves of leather-bound volumes. Behind a massive oak desk sat a man she had only seen in the news. William Blackwell, one of the wealthiest and most enigmatic figures in America. His silver hair gleamed under the lamplight, his dark eyes sharp yet kind. "Elena," he greeted softly, rising to his feet. "I've waited a long time for this moment." Her brows knitted. You know me?" William nodded slowly. "I knew your father very well. He saved me once, saved my company when I was a younger man. In return, I made him a promise to watch over you should the day ever come when you were in danger." Elena's breath caught. Memories of her father flooded back, his laughter, his words of wisdom, his sudden death years ago. You've been watching me all this time?" "Yes," William said firmly. "Your father entrusted me with something, your inheritance. A fortune he wanted hidden until you were ready. He wanted you to live a normal life, free from greed and predators like Daniel." Shock rippled through her. "Inheritance? I don't understand." William stepped closer, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're not just Elena Carter, the architect. You are the rightful heir to one of the largest estates in New York. And Daniel, he suspected. That's why he married you. That's why he tried to erase you." Tears welled in Elena's eyes, a storm of grief and fury mixing inside her. "He wanted me gone. Because of this?" William's gaze hardened. "Yes, but he failed. And now, Elena, it's time you learned the truth and took back what is yours." Elena stood trembling, her heart racing. The pain of betrayal still seared her, but now it was joined by something stronger, purpose. She was no longer just a victim. She was an heir. And soon, Daniel and Sienna would learn that the woman they tried to bury had returned, stronger than ever. For days, Elena rested in the safety of William Blackwell's estate. The nightmares never left her. Visions of Daniel's cold eyes, the suffocating weight of soil, Sienna's cruel laughter. She would wake up gasping, clutching her stomach, reminding herself she was still alive. Her baby was still alive. And that truth became her anchor. William kept his word. He didn't just offer her shelter, he offered her power. "You can't return to your old life," he told her one morning, his voice calm but resolute. "To the world you're gone. Daniel believes you're buried, forgotten. That is your greatest weapon. You'll rise when the time is right, but first, you must be ready." Elena, still trembling with grief, frowned. "Ready for what? I'm no fighter. I'm just—" Her hand touched her belly. "A mother trying to survive." William's dark eyes softened. "And that is exactly why you will win. You're fighting not only for yourself, but for your child. That strength, Elena, is far greater than anything Daniel or Sienna will ever have." Michael stepped in then, carrying files, photographs, documents. "We've been tracking them," he said, laying the evidence across the table. Pictures of Daniel and Sienna in luxury hotels, transactions siphoned from joint accounts, secret meetings with corrupt investors. Every photo was a dagger to Elena's heart, but also fuel for the fire inside her. "Look at them," Michael said firmly. "They believe you're gone. They're careless now. That arrogance is our opportunity." The days turned into weeks, and William began shaping Elena into someone new. She learned to control her voice, her posture, her presence. No longer the timid wife, but a woman who could command a room. Michael trained her in reading contracts, spotting lies, and even simple self-defense. "Knowledge is protection," he reminded her. At night, William shared stories of her father, his brilliance, his mistakes, his dream that Elena would one day lead with both heart and strength. She cried often, mourning what she lost, but with every tear, her resolve deepened. She stood before a mirror one evening, draped in a sleek black dress William's team had tailored for her. The woman staring back was no longer fragile. Her eyes, though scarred by pain, burned with determination. She touched her belly and whispered, "We will not be victims, we will rise." William nodded in approval. "When the time comes, you'll walk into the light again, Elena. And when you do, Daniel and Sienna will wish they had never touched you." For the first time since the grave, Elena felt a surge of power. She was no longer the woman who begged for love. She was preparing for war, and soon the world would witness the rebirth of the woman they tried to bury. While Elena rebuilt herself in silence, Daniel and Sienna celebrated loudly. To the world, Elena Carter had vanished, another society wife who couldn't handle the weight of her husband's ambition. Daniel played the grieving widower with perfect precision, telling colleagues that Elena had left him for personal reasons. In private, he and Sienna toasted their newfound freedom with expensive champagne. Their nights were filled with glittering parties, Sienna parading in jewels Elena had once worn, her laughter echoing through the penthouse halls. She sprawled across Elena's bed, draped in silk sheets, whispering promises of the empire they would build together. Daniel, drunk on power and lust, believed her every word. Financially, everything seemed to fall into place. With Elena gone, Daniel gained control of her accounts, selling off assets that were never his to touch. Sienna pushed him further, encouraging reckless investments and bolder displays of wealth. "Let them see us," she purred one evening, adjusting her diamond necklace in the mirror. "Let them see who really runs this city." But beneath the glitter, cracks were already forming. Daniel's arrogance blinded him, but whispers circled through the business world. Partners noticed his impulsive decisions. Rivals sensed weakness. And though Sienna clung to his arm in public, she whispered in private about how she could have done better. How Daniel was still too cautious, too haunted by the ghost of the woman they thought gone. Still, they reveled in the illusion of victory. They attended galas draped in luxury, their photos splashed across magazines. Sienna smiled at the cameras, her hand proudly on Daniel's chest, while reporters praised her as the new queen of his empire. The perfect couple, headlines called them. Neither flinched at the irony. In the penthouse nursery, the one Elena had painted with soft blues, Sienna laughed as she ordered decorators to strip it bare. "No child, no crib, no mess," she sneered. "This is our space now." Daniel watched silently, but said nothing. The image of Elena clutching her belly sometimes flickered in his mind late at night, but he drowned it with whiskey and Sienna's perfume. Their arrogance grew, their cruelty unchecked. To them, Elena was gone forever. They believed they had buried not just a woman, but the last obstacle standing in their way. But across the city, in the quiet estate of William Blackwell, Elena was alive. She was waiting, learning, preparing. And while Daniel and Sienna celebrated their triumph, their downfall was already being written. For now, they raised their glasses high, blind to the storm that would soon crash through their perfect facade. They believed they had won everything, never realizing they had already lost it all. The night of her return was carefully chosen. William Blackwell didn't believe in coincidence. He believed in timing. And tonight, Daniel was hosting a major shareholders' gala, a night he had orchestrated to cement his reputation as the sole power behind his company. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, gold accents, and glasses of champagne raised in his honor. Sienna clung to his arm like a prize he had earned, dazzling in a crimson gown that screamed triumph. Every eye in the room watched them, the new golden couple. Investors whispered about Daniel's rise, unaware of the rot beneath the surface. Sienna soaked in the attention, her smile smug, her gaze daring anyone to question her place at his side. For them, the night was victory embodied. Then the doors opened. A hush rippled through the crowd as heads turned. A woman stepped inside, tall, radiant, and commanding. She wore a sleek black gown that hugged her figure, her hair cascading in soft waves, her eyes sharp as glass. She walked with the poise of someone who owned the room, each step echoing against marble floors like the toll of a bell. It was Elena. Alive. For a heartbeat, silence consumed the gala. Champagne glasses froze mid-air, whispers caught in throats. Daniel's face drained of color, his jaw tightening. Sienna's smirk faltered, her grip on his arm tightening until her knuckles whitened. Elena met their stunned gazes but didn't flinch. She was no longer the timid wife who cried in the shadows. She was reborn, cloaked in strength and dignity. "Good evening," she said smoothly, her voice carrying through the room. "I hope I'm not interrupting." The crowd erupted, gasps, murmurs, disbelief. Some investors rushed forward to greet her, recognizing her as Daniel's long-absent wife. Cameras flashed, desperate to capture the impossible sight. Elena smiled faintly, accepting their astonishment with grace. Daniel stumbled forward, his mask of confidence cracking. "Elena," he hissed under his breath, his voice low, trembling with panic. "You're supposed to be gone?" she finished for him, her eyes never leaving his. "Funny how life doesn't follow your plans." Sienna tried to laugh, tried to wave it off as some dramatic stunt, but her voice trembled, betraying the fear in her eyes. Elena simply turned away from her, focusing instead on the room full of witnesses now questioning everything they thought they knew about Daniel Carter. That night wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about resurrection. About showing the world she had not been erased but transformed. Elena Carter was alive, stronger, and ready to claim what was hers. As the flashbulbs popped and the whispers turned into shouts, Daniel realized the illusion of victory was slipping from his hands. The woman he tried to bury had returned, and this time, she wasn't going to be silent. The shock of Elena's reappearance still hung in the air when she stepped onto the stage where Daniel had been basking in applause minutes earlier. The spotlight shifted, illuminating her figure against the glittering backdrop. Every camera in the ballroom swung to her, every eye fixed on the woman who was supposed to be gone. Daniel stumbled forward, sweat prickling his forehead. "Elena, this isn't the time." She cut him off with a single glance, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "You've had plenty of time, Daniel. Years, in fact. Tonight, the truth belongs to me." The crowd murmured. Investors leaned closer. Reporters raised their phones. Elena drew a breath and turned to Michael, who was standing discreetly at the side of the room. He opened a leather briefcase and handed her a stack of files. Her hands were steady as she lifted the first document. For months, Daniel Carter has funneled money out of joint accounts into private ventures. Here are the transfers. Millions siphoned away, not for business, but for indulgence. Gasps rippled through the audience. She laid down another file. Here are the photographs. Daniel Carter and his associate Sienna Moore in luxury hotels, on trips billed to the company. The images flashed on a large screen behind her. Intimate pictures of Daniel and Sienna, undeniable, damning. Sienna paled, her crimson lipstick suddenly too bright, too garish under the lights. Elena's voice grew stronger with each word. "You all trusted him. You invested in him. And this is what he's done. Lies, betrayal, corruption." Daniel lunged toward her, trying to grab the files, but Michael intercepted him, stepping between them like a wall. The crowd erupted in whispers that grew into angry shouts. Investors who once clinked glasses with Daniel now pointed fingers, demanding answers. Sienna tried to recover, stepping forward with a brittle smile. "She's lying. This is all fabricated." But Elena wasn't finished. She held up one last document, her eyes burning with resolve. "And here is the truth Daniel wanted buried with me. My inheritance, my rightful claim. Assets Daniel married into but never owned. He thought he could erase me and take it all. But I'm alive. And everything he tried to steal now returns to its rightful place." The room erupted into chaos. Some applauded, others gasped. Cameras flashed like lightning. Daniel's face twisted with rage, veins bulging in his neck as he shouted over the noise. "You don't know what you're doing, Elena. You'll regret this. But his words carried no weight anymore. The power had shifted. Elena stood tall under the spotlight, not as a broken wife, but as a woman reborn, armed with truth. And as Daniel's empire trembled on the edge of collapse, Elena delivered her final blow of the night. The grave you dug for me, Daniel, has become the grave of your own empire. The gala ended in chaos. What was supposed to be Daniel's night of triumph had turned into a nightmare broadcast to every influential figure in the city. By the next morning, headlines screamed betrayal, corruption, and scandal. Pregnant wife returns from the dead to expose husband splashed across the front pages. Social media erupted, branding Daniel and Sienna as predators who had preyed on a vulnerable woman. Investors panicked. Stocks tied to Daniel's company plummeted overnight. Phone calls went unanswered, deals collapsed, and once loyal partners severed ties to protect themselves. Board members who had smiled beside him only days before now demanded his resignation. "You've destroyed the company," one executive hissed during an emergency meeting. "We won't go down with you." Sienna, once adored in designer gowns, found doors slamming in her face. Invitations to galas vanished. Influential friends unfollowed her, brands canceled contracts, and whispers followed her everywhere. Homewrecker, snake, murderess. Her pride curdled into rage. She stormed through the penthouse, smashing glasses, her screams echoing. "This was supposed to be our empire, Daniel. You promised." Daniel, stripped of his confidence, paced like a caged animal. He drowned himself in whiskey, his shirt unbuttoned, his eyes bloodshot. The man who once strutted through boardrooms now barked at shadows, paranoid that every knock on the door was the police, every phone call another betrayal. He clung to Sienna, but even she began to resent him, her loyalty cracking under the weight of failure. The backlash was merciless. Reporters camped outside their building, cameras flashing whenever they dared step out. Protesters shouted Elena's name, praising her courage, demanding justice. Daniel tried to issue a statement, claiming Elena fabricated the evidence, but no one believed him. The images, the documents, the testimony, it was undeniable. His credibility was gone. Meanwhile, Elena's strength grew. Media outlets painted her as the woman who had risen from betrayal and near death, a mother fighting not only for herself but for her unborn child. Sympathy swelled for her, while hatred for Daniel and Sienna intensified. She didn't speak often, but when she did, her words cut deep. "They tried to bury me, but the truth cannot be buried." At night, Daniel raged, smashing bottles, blaming Sienna for pushing him too far. Sienna, her mask slipping, snapped back. "You're weak. I carried you this far, and you still failed." Their partnership, once united in greed, fractured under the pressure. The world they had built on lies crumbled piece by piece. But the worst was yet to come. Because Elena wasn't finished. She had exposed them, yes, but soon she would strip away the last shred of their dignity. And as Daniel stared at the headlines that branded him a monster, he realized the truth. The grave he dug for Elena had become the pit he and Sienna were now sinking into, with no one left to save them. The boardroom was silent when Elena entered. Cameras lined the walls, reporters packed the corners, and executives sat stiffly around the polished mahogany table. The meeting had been called to decide the fate of Daniel Carter, but everyone knew it was more than that. It was the day truth would face deceit. Elena walked with poise, dressed in a tailored navy suit that commanded respect. The baby bump beneath her blouse was visible, a living symbol of resilience. At her side was William Blackwell, his presence like a fortress, and Michael Evans, standing as silent proof of everything that had happened. Daniel sat at the far end of the table, his tie loosened, his face haggard. Sienna hovered behind him, her once perfect composure cracked. She tried to flash a smile for the cameras, but her eyes betrayed fear. Elena's gaze locked on Daniel. "You tried to erase me," she began, her voice calm yet strong. "But here I stand, alive, stronger, and ready to finish what you started." Daniel scoffed, forcing a laugh. "You think this little performance changes anything? You're nothing without me. You were always nothing." Elena placed a file on the table, sliding it across to the board members. Inside were contracts, bank statements, and Michael's recorded testimony of the night Daniel and Sienna buried her. Gasps filled the room as executives leaned forward, their faces hardening. "This," Elena said, her voice ringing clear, "is the truth. Evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder. Daniel Carter is not a leader. He is a criminal. And the world deserves to know. Sienna panicked, whispering fiercely into Daniel's ear, "Do something." But he sat frozen, his confidence shattered. The board chair cleared his throat. Effective immediately, Daniel Carter is removed from all positions of authority. These files will be forwarded to law enforcement. Chaos erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, voices collided in the air. Daniel shot to his feet, slamming his fists against the table. "You can't do this. I built this empire." Elena met his fury with quiet strength. "You didn't build it, you stole it, and now you'll lose it all." Sienna, realizing the tide had turned, tried to slip away, but Michael blocked her path. The cameras caught every angle, her trembling hands, her pale face. "Don't touch me," she hissed, but her voice cracked, weak. Elena didn't raise her voice, but her words struck like thunder. "You buried me alive, Daniel. You left me to die with your child inside me. But the grave you dug became the stage for your downfall. That is justice." The room fell into stunned silence. Reporters scribbled furiously, flashes exploded, and Daniel slumped into his chair, defeated. Sienna sank beside him, her facade shattered completely. Elena stood tall, her eyes steady, her heart calm. She had faced her betrayers and won. The battle was over, but the story of her rebirth was only beginning. The fall of Daniel and Sienna was swift and merciless. Within hours of the confrontation, news outlets broadcasted Elena's evidence across the nation. Every document, every photo, every testimony spread like wildfire. The glamorous facade of Daniel Carter and Sienna Moore collapsed under the weight of undeniable truth. Police stormed Daniel's penthouse before dawn. Reporters swarmed outside as flashing lights illuminated the night. Daniel, once hailed as a rising mogul, was dragged out in handcuffs, shouting curses at the cameras. His face, once the image of charm, was now twisted in rage and desperation. "This is a setup," he screamed, but no one believed him anymore. Sienna's arrest came hours later. She tried to escape through a back entrance of a luxury hotel, but Michael and investigators cornered her. Her designer heels sank into the wet pavement as officers tightened the cuffs on her wrists. "You don't understand," she cried, mascara streaking down her face. "He made me do it." But the evidence told a different story. She was as guilty as Daniel, and the world knew it. The courtroom overflowed when their trial began. Elena sat in the front row, her hands resting protectively on her belly, her eyes steady as she faced the people who had tried to end her life. The jury listened to recordings of Daniel and Sienna's conversations, their cold planning of her death. They watched the video Michael had captured the night she was buried alive. Gasps echoed, tears fell, and rage simmered in every heart present. When the verdict was read, the room erupted, guilty on all charges: fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Daniel's shoulders sagged, his eyes hollow. Sienna collapsed in tears, clawing at his arm as if he could save her, but he shook her off. In that moment, the alliance built on lust and greed shattered completely. The judge's words sealed their fate. Decades behind bars. No penthouses, no champagne, no empire. Only cold walls and steel bars. As officers led them away, Daniel glared at Elena one last time, his voice a hoarse growl. "You ruined me." Elena stood, her voice calm but firm. "No, Daniel, you ruined yourself." The crowd applauded as he was dragged out, the sound of justice ringing louder than his curses. Sienna's sobs echoed down the hallway, fading into silence. Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered, chanting Elena's name. Reporters thrust microphones toward her, asking how it felt to win. She didn't gloat. She simply placed a hand on her stomach and said, "This isn't just my victory. It's for every woman who has been silenced, betrayed, or left for dead. We are stronger than they think." For Daniel and Sienna, the punishment was complete. Their empire was gone, their reputations destroyed, their freedom stolen, and the world they tried to bury Elena in had become the prison that buried them instead. The storm had passed. The trial was over. Justice delivered. For the first time in months, Elena awoke without fear pressing down on her chest. The mansion no longer felt like a refuge, but a home. A place where she could breathe freely and dream again. In the weeks that followed, she poured herself into healing. William ensured the best doctors cared for her pregnancy, monitoring every heartbeat, every flutter. Michael remained a constant presence, protective yet unobtrusive, quietly watching over her with the loyalty of someone who had seen her at her lowest and vowed never to let her fall again. Elena often walked the gardens of William's estate, her hand resting on her growing belly, whispering to the life inside her. "We made it," she would murmur. "They tried to bury us, but we rose." The flowers around her bloomed brighter, as if nature itself celebrated her survival. When her child was born, a healthy baby boy with her eyes and her father's smile, Elena wept tears of joy. Holding him in her arms, she felt the weight of every betrayal lift, replaced by something stronger than revenge, love. She named him Gabriel, a symbol of hope, a reminder that light could emerge from the darkest of nights. Publicly, Elena became more than just a survivor. She stepped into her inheritance, guided by William, learning to run the empire her father had left behind. But she redefined it, not as a monument to power and greed, but as a force for good. She funded shelters for women, programs for children, and initiatives that gave voices to those who had been silenced. The world watched in awe as the woman who had been buried alive transformed into a beacon of strength. Reporters asked her what kept her going. She always answered the same: "Because I refused to let betrayal define me. My story isn't about what they did to me, it's about what I chose to do after." At night, when the world was quiet, Elena would sit by Gabriel's crib humming lullabies her mother once sang. The shadows no longer frightened her. Instead, they reminded her of the journey she had survived. Daniel and Sienna's names faded into obscurity, their legacy one of shame. Elena, however, became a name spoken with admiration. She was no longer the woman they tried to erase. She was the woman who rose from the grave and built a future brighter than ever. And as she stood on the balcony of her estate, Gabriel in her arms, the city lights twinkling in the distance, she whispered words that carried not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever been broken and rebuilt. "They tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed. And now I will never stop growing." So that's how our story comes to an end. My wonderful friends, you're still here with me, aren't you? If you've stayed all the way to this moment, then something inside this story must have touched your heart in a very real way. And maybe, just maybe, it's because Elena's journey isn't only hers, it's also a reflection of our own struggles. Life will betray us, disappoint us, and sometimes even try to bury us. But as the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." What tried to destroy Elena became the very reason she rose stronger. And that can be true for you too. No matter how deep the pain, healing is possible. No matter how dark the night, there is always dawn waiting to break. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can always choose how to rise from it. If this story has touched you, please give it a like, share it with someone who might need it today, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories. Together, let's keep growing stronger, one story at a time.
The air in the courtroom was a suffocating blend of cheap air freshener and palpable despair. For Sarah Miller, it felt like drowning. Across the aisle, her ex-husband, Mark, sat with a look of practiced solemnity, his hand resting possessively on the arm of a woman half his age. Chloe, the woman who had dismantled her family. Mark had brought his mistress to court, a calculated power play in their brutal custody battle. He was painting a picture of a new, stable family, while Sarah was just the broken, discarded part. But as the judge's gaze swept over them, a quiet intensity in her eyes, Sarah felt a flicker of something other than fear. It was the last, desperate ember of hope, waiting for a single breath of truth to ignite. The silence in the house was the first thing that had truly felt like her own. It had been a year since the divorce, a year since Mark's things were packed into boxes, and his presence, a heavy, oppressive blanket, had finally been lifted from their suburban home in Maple Creek. In its place, a fragile peace had settled. It was a quiet life, punctuated by the joyful chaos of her 6-year-old daughter Lily, a whirlwind of bright pink dresses and glitter glue. Sarah had spent the last 12 months meticulously rebuilding their world. She'd repainted the living room a warm, buttery yellow, replacing the sterile beige Mark had insisted on. She'd planted a garden, a riot of unruly wildflowers that defied the perfect manicured lawns of their neighbors. She and Lily had their rituals. Pancake Saturdays, Friday night movie marathons buried under a mountain of blankets, and long walks in the nearby woods where Lily would collect treasures, smooth stones, fallen leaves, and the occasional iridescent beetle. For the first time in a decade, Sarah felt like she could breathe. Her marriage to Mark had been a slow erosion of self. He wasn't overtly cruel, not in a way that left visible bruises. His weapon was control, wielded with the precision of a surgeon. It was in the way he'd helpfully manage their finances until she had no idea where their money went. It was in the subtle dismissal of her opinions, the gentle steering of her career choices away from anything that might make her too independent. He was the successful one, the charismatic financial advisor everyone admired. She was just his wife, a supporting role in the grand production of his life. The discovery of the affair had been both a cataclysm and a liberation. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet, sickening realization born from a credit card statement left on the counter, a charge for a boutique hotel in the city on a night he was supposedly on a business trip. When she'd confronted him, he hadn't even bothered to deny it. He'd looked at her with a chilling sort of pity, as if she were a piece of outdated technology he was finally upgrading. The upgrade was Chloe Jennings, a 25-year-old intern from his office with wide, ambitious eyes and a complete lack of compunction. The divorce had been swift. Mark, ever conscious of his public image, wanted it clean. He was generous with the settlement, giving her the house and enough money to live comfortably. For Lily's sake, he'd said, a phrase that dripped with false magnanimity. He knew it made him look good, the benevolent ex-husband ensuring his child's stability. He took an apartment in the city, and for a while, the arrangement worked. He saw Lily every other weekend, picking her up in his gleaming new Tesla, a symbol of his untethered success. But the peace was an illusion. The first tremor came in the form of a registered letter, a thick cream-colored envelope that felt heavy with dread in her hands. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. The legal jargon swam before her eyes, but the words that leaped out were brutally clear. Petition for modification of custodial arrangement. Full physical custody. The world tilted on its axis. He wanted to take Lily. Her first call was to Eleanor Vance, the lawyer who had handled her divorce. Eleanor was a woman who seemed to be forged from steel and caffeine, her voice a no-nonsense rasp over the phone. "He has no grounds, Sarah," Eleanor had said, her tone attempting to soothe the raw panic in Sarah's voice. "The court's default is to maintain the status quo unless there's a significant change in circumstances. Has anything changed? Are you in any trouble?" "No, of course not," Sarah had stammered, pacing her sun-drenched kitchen, which suddenly felt like a cage. "My life is quiet. It's all about Lily." What's his stated reason? The petition must allege something. Sarah's eyes scanned the document again. He claims my unstable emotional state and lack of a structured environment are detrimental to our daughter's well-being. He says he and his new partner can provide a more wholesome and financially secure home. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped Eleanor's lips. His partner? The intern? He's going to bring his mistress into a custody hearing? That's bold, I'll give him that. Arrogant, but bold. The arrogance was Mark's signature. He believed his own narrative so completely that he couldn't fathom anyone else questioning it. He was the hero, the provider, the one who knew best. In his mind, this wasn't a cruel act. It was a rescue mission. He was saving Lily from her mother's mediocrity. That night, as she tucked Lily into bed, the weight of the petition pressed down on her chest. Lily's room was a sanctuary of childhood, the walls covered in her own crayon drawings, a stuffed unicorn named Sparklehoof holding pride of place on her pillow. "Mummy, why are your eyes wet?" Lily asked, her small hand reaching up to touch Sarah's cheek. Sarah forced a smile, her heart splintering. Just a little tired, sweet pea. Grown-up stuff. Is it because of Daddy? The question was so direct, so innocent, Sarah didn't know how to answer it. How could she explain that the man who was supposed to love them both was trying to tear their world apart, that he saw their quiet, happy life as something broken that needed fixing? Daddy and I just disagree on some things sometimes, she said, the understatement of the century. But we both love you more than anything in the whole wide world. Never, ever forget that. I know, Lily said, snuggling deeper into her covers. Can you tell me the story about the brave knight again? As Sarah recounted the familiar tale of a knight who protects her kingdom from a fearsome dragon, she felt a shift inside her. The fear was still there, a cold, coiling serpent in her gut. But beneath it, a different emotion was taking root. A fierce, primal anger. Mark had underestimated her. He had always seen her as soft, pliable, an accessory to his life. He had forgotten that a mother's love wasn't just soft blankets and bedtime stories. It was also a sword and a shield. He wanted a war. He was about to get one. He was not taking her daughter. The preliminary hearing was held in a small, suffocating room at the county courthouse. The beige walls seemed to absorb all the hope from anyone who entered, leaving only the sterile scent of bureaucracy and quiet desperation. Sarah sat beside Eleanor Vance, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She had chosen her outfit with the care of a soldier preparing for battle. A simple navy blue dress, sensible low heels, and her hair pulled back in a neat professional bun. She needed to look stable, calm. Everything Mark's petition accused her of not being. Then he walked in. Mark was the picture of success, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly mortgage payment. He exuded an aura of effortless confidence, the kind that came from a life of things always going his way. And beside him, clinging to his arm, was Chloe Jennings. Seeing her in the flesh, in this context, was a physical blow. Sarah had only ever seen pictures of her, curated, smiling images on social media. In person, she was even younger, prettier and more polished than Sarah had imagined. She wore a cream-colored dress that was both modest and expensive, her blonde hair styled in perfect, glossy waves. She looked like a catalogue model for a life Sarah was no longer a part of. The most galling part was the way they acted. They weren't hiding. They were performing. Mark would lean in and whisper something in Chloe's ear, and she would smile, a bright, dazzling smile that was clearly meant to be seen. They were a team, a united front, and Sarah was the opposition, the obstacle to their perfect, happy future. Eleanor leaned in, her voice a low, steadying murmur in Sarah's ear. "Don't look at them. Look at the judge. They don't matter. He's the only one who matters." The judge was a man in his late 50s, Judge Albright, with tired eyes and a weary expression that suggested he'd seen this exact drama play out 1,000 times before. He shuffled through the paperwork, his face unreadable. Mark's lawyer, a slick, silver-haired man named Peterson, spoke first. His voice was smooth as silk, weaving a narrative of concern and paternal love. He spoke of Mark's thriving career, his financial stability, and his deep desire to provide his daughter with every possible advantage. "Mr. Miller has recently entered into a stable, long-term partnership with Ms. Chloe Jennings," Peterson said, gesturing towards Chloe, who offered the judge a small, demure smile. "Together, they can offer Lily a two-parent household, a structured environment that, regrettably, her mother is currently unable to provide." Eleanor stood up, her presence sharp and commanding. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is making unsubstantiated claims about my client's fitness as a parent. The only thing that has changed since the divorce decree is that Mr. Miller now wishes to install his former mistress in the family home." The word mistress hung in the air. Chloe's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Mark shot a venomous glare across the aisle at Sarah, who kept her eyes fixed firmly on the judge. Peterson countered smoothly. Mr. Miller and Ms. Jennings are in a committed, loving relationship. We are prepared to show that Ms. Miller's own lifestyle has become erratic, that her emotional state following the divorce has created an environment of instability for the child. It was a lie, a complete fabrication, but it was Mark's strategy. Throw enough mud and hope some of it sticks. He would twist her grief into instability, her independence into recklessness. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through Peterson's rhetoric, "Mrs. Miller has been the primary caregiver for Lily since birth. She has maintained the family home, enrolled Lily in school, and managed all of her day-to-day needs. The only thing erratic here is Mr. Miller's sudden, self-serving desire to upend his daughter's life, conveniently after his new partner has moved in with him." Judge Albright held up a hand, silencing both lawyers. He looked from Mark to Sarah, his gaze lingering for a moment. "This is a preliminary hearing. We are not going to try the entire case today. I am setting a date for a full custody hearing in 6 weeks. In the interim, the current custody arrangement will remain in place." He paused, then directed his next words to Mark. "Mr. Miller, I will caution you. Bringing your new partner into these proceedings at such an early stage can be perceived in several ways. Be mindful of that." It was a small victory, a tiny crack in Mark's armor of arrogance. But as they filed out of the room, Mark made sure to deliver a parting shot. He caught Sarah's eye in the hallway, his expression a mask of false sympathy. "Sarah, this doesn't have to be ugly," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Chloe stood a few feet away, pretending to be engrossed in her phone. "Just agree to the new arrangement. It's what's best for Lily. Don't drag her through a messy fight you can't win." The condescension in his tone, the absolute certainty of his victory, was like a spark to dry tinder. "The only thing that's best for Lily is to be with her mother in her own home," Sarah retorted, her voice shaking slightly but firm. "And the only one making this messy is you, Mark. You brought her here." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked away, Eleanor at her side. Her heart was pounding, a frantic drum against her ribs. She had survived the first skirmish, but the war was just beginning. "He's trying to intimidate you," Eleanor said as they walked down the courthouse steps into the jarringly bright afternoon sun. "He thinks you'll crumble. He's counting on it." "I won't," Sarah said, the words feeling more like a promise to herself than a statement to her lawyer. "Good," Eleanor replied, unlocking her car, "because he just made his first mistake. The judge didn't like that little show. It was arrogant, and if there's one thing judges hate more than lying, it's arrogance. Now, we have 6 weeks to prove he's not just arrogant, but that he's a liar with a hidden agenda." As Sarah drove home, the image of Chloe's perfect smile and Mark's possessive hand on her arm was burned into her mind. It wasn't just about stability or a two-parent home. It was about erasure. Mark wanted to erase Sarah from the picture, to replace her with a newer, more compliant model, and rewrite their family history with himself as the hero. He wasn't just fighting for custody, he was fighting for control of the narrative. And Sarah knew, with a chilling certainty, that she had to find a way to expose the truth before he buried her under his lies. The 6 weeks leading up to the custody hearing stretched before Sarah like a barren desert. The days were a blur of anxious activity, while the nights were long and sleepless, filled with the ghosts of 1,000 worst-case scenarios. Her home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a fishbowl. She imagined Mark's lawyers picking apart every detail of her life, twisting every late-night glass of wine with her best friend, Jessica, into a sign of alcoholism. Every moment of tearful frustration into proof of her emotional instability. Eleanor Vance, however, was a beacon of focused energy. "He's built his case on a lie," she'd stated during their first strategy session in her cluttered, book-lined office. "He claims this is about Lily's well-being. Our job is to find out what it's really about. Men like Mark don't do things without a reason that benefits them directly. They started with the finances. Mark had provided his financial disclosures, a thick stack of papers detailing his income, assets, and investments. On the surface, it was a picture of overwhelming success. His salary as a senior advisor at a prestigious firm was astronomical. He had a robust stock portfolio and a healthy retirement fund. It was all designed to scream stability to the court. "He's making a big show of his wealth," Eleanor mused, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on a page detailing his investment accounts. "He wants to contrast it with your situation, but it feels too perfect, too polished." Eleanor hired a forensic accountant, a quiet, meticulous man named Mr. Davies, who specialized in sniffing out financial deceptions in messy divorces. While he began his deep dive into Mark's empire of numbers, Sarah focused on what she could control, building a fortress of evidence around her own fitness as a mother. She asked for letters of recommendation from Lily's teachers, her pediatrician, and the parents of Lily's friends. The response was overwhelming. People who had seen her day in and day out, at school drop-offs, soccer practices, and birthday parties, painted a picture of a devoted, attentive, and loving mother. Each letter was a small stone in the wall she was building against Mark's assault. Her best friend, Jessica, was her rock. A fiercely loyal single mom herself, Jessica arrived most evenings with takeout and a bottle of wine, ready to listen, rage, or distract as needed. "He's a classic narcissist, Sarah," Jessica said one night as they sat at the kitchen table long after Lily was asleep. "This isn't about Lily. This is about winning. He can't stand that you're happy without him. That you're building a life where he's not the center of the universe. He has to destroy it to prove he still has power over you." Jessica's words resonated with a painful truth, but Eleanor's voice echoed in her head. Find out what it's really about. A week later, a small crack in Mark's story appeared. Sarah was sorting through old boxes in the attic, looking for photos of her and Lily to show the court, when she came across a file of documents from early in their marriage. It contained the original paperwork for a trust fund Mark's wealthy grandmother had set up for him. Sarah remembered him being dismissive of it at the time, claiming it was tied up in so much red tape it was hardly worth thinking about. She scanned the aged pages. Most of it was dense legalese, but one clause caught her eye. It stipulated that the principal of the trust, a substantial 7-figure sum, could only be accessed before the age of 40 under specific circumstances. One of them was for the establishment and maintenance of a primary family residence for the benefit of his legal dependents. Mark was turning 40 in 8 months. Her heart began to pound. She immediately called Eleanor. "I think I've found something," she said, her voice breathless. She read the clause aloud. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and then Eleanor let out a low whistle. "Well, well, well, that's interesting. He never disclosed this trust in the divorce. He claimed it was inaccessible. He always said it was locked up until he was older," Sarah explained. "And now he's trying to establish a primary family residence with Lily as the dependent," Eleanor finished, the pieces clicking into place. "If he gets full custody, he can argue that his new apartment, or a new house he plans to buy with Chloe, is the primary family residence. He could petition the trustees to release the funds." The audacity of it was staggering. This wasn't about providing a better life for Lily, it was about getting his hands on a multi-million-dollar trust fund. Lily wasn't a daughter to be cherished, she was a key to unlock a vault. The thought made Sarah feel sick. The revelation galvanized their efforts. Mr. Davies, the forensic accountant, now knew what to look for. He started digging into Mark's recent spending habits. What he found was even more disturbing. "Your ex-husband is living well beyond his means," Mr. Davies reported a few days later, his voice grim over the phone. "His salary is high, yes, but his expenditures are higher. The new car, the downtown apartment, the lavish gifts for Ms. Jennings. He's racking up significant debt. He's been liquidating parts of his stock portfolio to cover the shortfall, but that's not a sustainable strategy. He needs a massive infusion of cash, and he needs it soon. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was uglier than Sarah could have imagined. Mark wasn't the successful provider he pretended to be. He was a man in a financial death spiral, desperately trying to maintain an illusion of wealth, and he was willing to use his own daughter as collateral. The knowledge was both terrifying and empowering. The whispers of doubt had become a roar of certainty. This was no longer just a personal battle. It was about exposing a calculated, cynical fraud. One afternoon, as Sarah was picking Lily up from school, she saw them. Mark and Chloe were parked across the street watching. They weren't trying to be subtle. When Mark saw that Sarah had spotted them, he gave a small, smug wave, as if to say, "I'm always here. I'm always watching." Instead of feeling intimidated, Sarah felt a cold fury settle over her. She took Lily's hand, squeezed it tight, and smiled down at her daughter as if nothing was wrong. She would not let him see her fear. She would not let him think for 1 second that he was winning. He thought he was in control, that he was the master puppeteer pulling all the strings. But he didn't know that she had found the one string that could bring his entire elaborate stage crashing down around him. As the hearing date loomed closer, Mark intensified his campaign of psychological warfare. He was banking on Sarah's history of being non-confrontational, the decade she had spent placating his moods and deferring to his judgment. He expected her to unravel under the pressure. He began with small, insidious attacks. Mutual friends would call Sarah, reporting that Mark had expressed deep concern for her well-being. He was spinning a tale of a fragile ex-wife who was barely coping, a woman lost without his guidance. He'd mentioned to the other parents at the soccer field how worried he was that Lily's home life was unstructured, a carefully chosen word designed to sound reasonable and caring. Then came the direct provocations. He would schedule his weekend pickups for Lily at odd times, forcing Sarah to change her plans at the last minute, then document her frustration as proof of her inflexibility. He sent emails dripping with false concern, suggesting therapists for her and parenting classes she should attend, all of which he was no doubt forwarding to his lawyer, Peterson. Each move was a calculated poke, designed to elicit an emotional reaction he could use against her. But something in Sarah had hardened. The woman Mark thought he knew, the one who would have dissolved into tears and self-doubt, was gone. In her place was a mother fighting for her child, and that transformation had forged a spine of steel within her. With Eleanor's guidance, she responded to every provocation with unnerving calm. She replied to his emails with brief, polite, and non-committal sentences. She documented every instance of his manipulative behavior, creating a timeline that starkly contradicted the concerned father persona he was trying to sell. The shift in Sarah was not lost on Mark. His frustration began to show in small, almost imperceptible ways. During one tense exchange in her driveway, when he was dropping Lily off, his mask of calm slipped. "You know you're not going to win this, Sarah," he'd hissed, his voice low so Lily couldn't hear. "You're being selfish. You're thinking about what you want, not what's best for our daughter." "What's best for Lily is not being used as a pawn in your financial schemes, Mark," she'd replied coolly, her heart hammering but her voice steady. The shock on his face was instantaneous. It was a flicker of panic in his eyes, quickly masked by anger. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The trust fund, Mark. Grandma Eleanor's trust. I know you need custody to get your hands on it." He stared at her, his jaw tight. For the first time in their entire relationship, he seemed to be at a loss for words. He had always been 10 steps ahead, manipulating the narrative, controlling the flow of information. Her knowing about the trust was a variable he hadn't accounted for. He had underestimated her completely. "You're delusional," he finally spat out, before getting back in his car and speeding away. But Sarah had seen it, the crack in his perfect facade. Meanwhile, Eleanor was preparing their counter-offensive. "We have the motive, the trust fund. We have the means, his mounting debt. Now we need to dismantle his central argument that he and Chloe can provide a better home." Eleanor decided it was time to put Chloe Jennings under the microscope. She hired a private investigator, a discreet woman who began looking into Chloe's background. What she found wasn't scandalous, but it was illuminating. Chloe came from a working-class family and had put herself through college on scholarships and loans. She was ambitious, driven, and according to a former roommate the investigator spoke to, completely obsessed with the lifestyle of the ultra-wealthy. "She's not just in love with your ex-husband," Eleanor summarized. "She's in love with his wallet, or more accurately, the wallet he's pretending to have. She's hitched her wagon to what she thinks is a rising star. She's as much a part of the illusion as he is." This information sparked an idea for Sarah. A risky one. One Saturday, when she knew Mark was out of town on a supposed business trip, she took a drive to his upscale apartment building in the city. She waited in her car for hours, her stomach in knots. Finally, just after 3 p.m., Chloe emerged from the building, dressed for a day of shopping. Sarah got out of her car, her heart pounding. "Chloe!" Chloe turned, her eyes widening in surprise and then narrowing with suspicion. "Sarah, what are you doing here? Are you following me?" "I just want to talk to you for a minute," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice even. "We have nothing to talk about," Chloe said, turning to walk away. "Is he worth it?" Sarah called out, her voice stronger than she expected. "Is Mark worth destroying a little girl's life?" Chloe stopped. She turned back slowly, her expression a mixture of anger and defensiveness. "Mark is a good man. He's a wonderful father who just wants what's best for his daughter." She was reciting a script, words that had clearly been fed to her. "Does he?" Sarah pressed, taking a step closer. "Or does he just want what's best for his bank account? Do you know about the trust fund he's trying to access, the one that requires him to have full custody of Lily?" Chloe's face paled slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Sarah said, her voice softening with something that sounded almost like pity. "He's using you, Chloe, just like he's using Lily. He's built this fantasy of a perfect, wealthy life, but it's a house of cards. I've seen the financials. I know he's drowning in debt. Did you know that? When the money from that trust doesn't come through, and it won't, what do you think is going to happen to you? To this life he's promised you?" Chloe stared at her, her carefully constructed composure beginning to crumble. For a moment, Sarah saw past the ambitious intern to the young woman beneath, a woman who had perhaps been blinded by the promise of a fairy tale. "You should leave," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "Just think about it," Sarah said. "Think about what kind of man would use his own child as a financial tool. Is that really the man you want to build a life with?" Sarah walked back to her car, leaving Chloe standing on the sidewalk, a solitary, shaken figure against the cold glass and steel of the city. She didn't know if she had gotten through to her, but she had planted a seed of doubt, and in a facade built on lies, a single seed of doubt could be enough to make the whole thing fall apart. The power was shifting, and for the first time, Sarah felt she wasn't just playing defense. She was on the attack. The day of the final hearing arrived, cloaked in a grey, oppressive drizzle that mirrored the cold dread in Sarah's stomach. The courtroom was larger this time, more formal, the dark wood of the judge's bench and witness stand gleaming under the fluorescent lights. It felt like a stage set for an execution. Sarah sat beside Eleanor, a file of their carefully gathered evidence on the table between them like a shield. Across the aisle, Mark sat with Peterson, his lawyer. Chloe was seated in the front row of the gallery, directly behind him. She was dressed in a conservative grey suit, her face a pale, tense mask. She refused to meet Sarah's gaze. The new judge, Judge Amelia Thompson, was a woman in her 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a reputation for being both tough and fair. She had read every document, every deposition, and her expression was one of focused intensity. The morning was a grueling procession of legal maneuvering. Peterson called his witnesses first, painting a picture of Mark as a pillar of stability and Sarah as a flighty, emotional wreck. He twisted her grief into depression, her newfound independence into recklessness. He brought up the time Sarah had been 5 minutes late for a school pickup, the time Lily had scraped her knee at the park under her watch. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, each one designed to portray her as an unfit mother. Through it all, Sarah remained composed, following Eleanor's instructions to keep her expression neutral, her focus on the judge. When it was Eleanor's turn to cross-examine Mark's witnesses, she expertly dismantled their testimony, revealing their biases and the clear influence of Mark's narrative. Finally, it was Mark's turn to take the stand. He was the star of his own show, his performance flawless. He spoke of his deep, abiding love for Lily, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. He talked about his desire to give her a life of opportunity and security. "My daughter deserves a stable, two-parent home," he said, looking earnestly at Judge Thompson. "My partner, Chloe, is a wonderful woman. She adores Lily. She's ready to be a second parent to her, to provide the kind of support and structure that, unfortunately, Sarah is no longer capable of providing." When Eleanor began her cross-examination, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice crisp, "you claim this is about your daughter's well-being. Is that correct?" "Absolutely," Mark said, his confidence unwavering. "It has nothing to do with your personal finances?" "Of course not," he scoffed. "That's an insulting accusation." Eleanor walked slowly towards the witness stand. "Isn't it true, Mr. Miller, that your late grandmother established a significant trust fund for you?" Peterson was on his feet instantly. "Objection! Relevance!" "Your Honor," Eleanor countered smoothly, "it is highly relevant. It speaks directly to the petitioner's motive for seeking this sudden and drastic change in custody." "I'll allow it," Judge Thompson said, her eyes fixed on Mark. "Answer the question, Mr. Miller." Mark's composure flickered. "Yes, there is a trust." "And isn't it true," Eleanor continued, "that you are unable to access the principal of that trust, a sum of over $2 million, until you are 40, unless it is for the purpose of maintaining a primary family residence for your legal dependents?" Mark's face was turning a blotchy red. "That's a misrepresentation of the terms." "Is it?" Eleanor pressed, holding up a copy of the trust document. "And isn't it also true that you are currently in significant personal debt, having leveraged your assets to maintain a lifestyle you cannot afford?" "Objection!" Peterson shouted. "Sustained," the judge said. "Move on, Ms. Vance, you've made your point." Eleanor had planted the seed of doubt with the judge. Now it was time to dismantle the other half of Mark's case, the perfect ready-made family he was offering with Chloe. Peterson called Chloe to the stand. She walked gracefully, if stiffly, and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. She answered Peterson's questions in a soft, rehearsed voice, speaking of her affection for Lily and her desire to help create a nurturing home. She was the image of a perfect stepmother-in-waiting. When it was Eleanor's turn, she asked only a few gentle questions about Chloe's job and her relationship with Mark. Then she said, "I have no further questions, Your Honor." Peterson looked surprised but pleased, assuming they had no way to challenge his client's pristine image. But then Judge Thompson leaned forward, her gaze fixed on the young woman in the witness box. The room fell silent. "Ms. Jennings," the judge said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room, "I have just one question for you." Chloe looked up, a deer in the headlights. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Thompson's eyes were piercing, cutting through the layers of rehearsal and deception. "What is the name of Lily's teddy bear?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound that Sarah could hear the frantic beating of her own heart. It was such a simple question, a detail so small, so intimate, that it couldn't be faked. Anyone who had spent more than a few hours with Lily, anyone who had tucked her into bed or comforted her after a nightmare, would know the answer. Chloe's perfectly made-up face went blank. Her eyes darted towards Mark, a desperate, silent plea for help. Mark's face was a thundercloud of fury and panic. He could do nothing. I'm not sure I recall," Chloe stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "She has so many toys." "This is her special one," Judge Thompson pressed gently. "The one she can't sleep without, the one she's had since she was a baby." Chloe's composure shattered, her eyes filled with tears of humiliation. She looked from the judge to Mark and then down at her hands. The lie was exposed, not by a lawyer's trickery or a complex document, but by a simple, profound truth. She didn't know this child. She was a stranger. "The bear's name," Sarah heard herself whisper, the words a prayer of relief, "is Barnaby." Judge Thompson's gaze shifted from the crumbling witness to Mark, and her expression was one of utter contempt. In that moment, everyone in the courtroom knew it was over. The entire elaborate, cruel charade had been destroyed by one simple question. The judge's gavel came down with a crack that echoed the shattering of Mark's world. The verdict was swift, brutal, and utterly decisive. "Petition for modification of custody is denied," Judge Thompson announced, her voice ringing with authority. She didn't stop there. She looked directly at Mark, her eyes cold with fury. "Mr. Miller, this court finds your petition to be frivolous, manipulative, and brought in bad faith. You have attempted to use your own child as a pawn in what appears to be a cynical financial ploy. You have wasted this court's time, and most egregiously, you have subjected your daughter and her mother to immense and unnecessary emotional distress. I am awarding full legal and physical custody to the mother, Mrs. Sarah Miller. Your visitation will be reduced to supervised visits, pending a full psychological evaluation. This court is adjourned." The finality of her words sucked the air from the room. For a moment, no one moved. Sarah sat frozen, the words washing over her in a wave of disbelief and overwhelming relief. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to cry for months began to stream down her face. Eleanor reached over and squeezed her hand, a rare, genuine smile on her face. Across the aisle, the scene was imploding. Mark stood up, his face purple with rage. He turned not to his lawyer, but to Chloe, who was still sitting, ashen-faced, in the witness stand. "You useless idiot!" he snarled, his voice a venomous whisper that was audible in the stunned silence. "One simple thing. You couldn't remember one simple thing." Chloe flinched, as if he had struck her. The illusion of the loving, supportive couple evaporated, revealing the ugly reality beneath, a master and his failing subordinate. Peterson, his face grim, grabbed Mark's arm. "Mark, not here. Let's go." He tried to steer his client towards the exit, but the damage was done. The performance was over, and the audience had seen the monstrous truth behind the curtain. As they moved into the hallway, the fight erupted in full. "This is your fault," Mark raged at Chloe, his voice now echoing in the marble corridor. "I gave you everything. I told you what to study, what to say. You were supposed to be perfect." "You lied to me." Chloe's voice, for the first time, held a note of genuine strength, born of pure fury and humiliation. "You told me this was about giving Lily a better life. You never said anything about a trust fund. You used me." "You wanted to be used," he shot back. "You loved the money, the dinners, the clothes. Don't pretend you were some innocent victim." Sarah and Eleanor walked past them, Sarah deliberately averting her eyes. She didn't want to see this. She felt no triumph in their destruction, only a profound sadness for the wreckage they had caused. She had won, but the victory felt heavy, stained by the ugliness of the battle. Once outside, the cool, damp air felt like the first clean breath she'd taken in months. The city noise, the traffic, the distant sirens, it all sounded like a symphony of freedom. "It's over," she whispered, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "It's over," Eleanor confirmed. "He won't be bothering you again for a very long time. A psychological evaluation and supervised visits, he'll never subject his ego to that. He'll fade away. Driving home, Sarah felt a strange emptiness. She had been in fight-or-flight mode for so long, fueled by adrenaline and fear, that the sudden absence of the threat left a void. She had been so focused on the war that she hadn't thought about what peace would feel like. When she walked through her front door, the house was quiet. Lily was still at Jessica's, who had taken her for the day to shield her from the courthouse. The buttery yellow walls, the messy pile of Lily's toys in the corner, the faint scent of the wildflowers from the garden drifting through an open window, it was all still here. Her world had survived. She walked into Lily's room and her eyes fell on the small, well-loved teddy bear sitting on the pillow. Barnaby. His button eyes seemed to stare back at her, a silent, steadfast companion who had been at the center of it all. She picked him up, his fur worn smooth from years of hugs, and held him tight. This small, stuffed creature represented everything Mark and Chloe had never understood. He wasn't a toy, he was a confidant. He was the keeper of secrets, the brave knight in nighttime adventures, the silent witness to fevers and scraped knees and bedtime stories. He was a part of the intricate, invisible fabric of their life together. He was love in a language they would never be able to speak. Later that evening, when Jessica brought a sleepy Lily home, Sarah knelt and pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, burying her face in her hair that smelled of playground dust and bubble gum. "I love you so much, sweet pea," she murmured. "I love you too, Mommy," Lily said, hugging her back tightly. "Did you have a good day with the lawyers?" Sarah smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Yes, baby. It was a very good day." The immediate threat was gone, but Sarah knew the scars would remain. The betrayal ran deep, a poison that would take time to work its way out of her system. But as she tucked her daughter into bed, with Barnaby settled securely in the crook of her arm, she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The storm had passed, the house was safe, the kingdom was secure, the dragon had been vanquished, not by a magic sword, but by the simple, unbreakable truth of a mother's love. The months that followed the court case were a study in quiet reclamation. The silence in the house was no longer fragile. It was strong, rooted. The fear that had been a constant low-level hum in the background of Sarah's life finally faded, replaced by the simple, steady rhythm of their days. As Eleanor had predicted, Mark disappeared. Faced with the humiliation of supervised visits and a court-ordered psychological evaluation, he chose to vanish instead. He sent a single terse email stating he was relocating for a new business opportunity and would be in touch at a later date. He paid his child support, a transaction as cold and impersonal as an ATM withdrawal, but he made no effort to see or speak to Lily. For a man who had claimed to be desperate for custody, his absence was the final, damning admission of his true motives. At first, Lily was confused. She would ask when Daddy was coming, her small face clouded with a hurt Sarah couldn't entirely shield her from. Sarah answered as honestly as she could, without bitterness. "Daddy needed to go away for a while to sort some things out, sweet pea. But he loves you, and I love you, and we are going to be just fine." And over time, the questions grew less frequent. Their world, a universe of two, became enough. Sarah's redemption was not a dramatic, cinematic event. It was a slow, deliberate process of rebuilding, piece by piece. She enrolled in an online course for landscape design, turning her passion for her unruly garden into a potential career. The work was challenging and fulfilling, occupying her mind and her hands, and leaving little room for the ghosts of the past. She found joy in learning the Latin names of plants, in sketching out designs for vibrant, living spaces for others. It was the opposite of Mark's world of abstract numbers and financial deception. It was tangible, real, and beautiful. She reconnected with old friends, people she had drifted from during her marriage when Mark had subtly curated their social circle. She hosted dinner parties where the laughter was loud and genuine. She went on a weekend trip with Jessica, just the two of them, and they hiked and talked and drank cheap wine under the stars. And Sarah felt a lightness she hadn't realized she'd been missing for over a decade. One crisp autumn afternoon, about 6 months after the hearing, Sarah was at a local nursery, picking out bulbs for her spring garden, when she saw a familiar face. It was Chloe. She was dressed in simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The expensive polished armor was gone, and she looked younger, more vulnerable. Chloe saw her at the same time, and her first instinct was to turn and flee, but she stopped, took a breath, and walked hesitantly towards Sarah. "Hi," Chloe said, her voice quiet. "Hi, Chloe," Sarah replied, her own voice neutral, her heart giving a nervous flutter. I just wanted to say—" "I'm sorry," Chloe said, looking at the gravel path between them, "for everything. There's no excuse for what I did, for my part in it. I was stupid. I believed a fantasy and I let it make me into a person I'm not proud of." Sarah looked at the young woman before her. The anger and betrayal she had once felt had cooled into something closer to pity. She saw not a villain, but another person who had been caught in the vortex of Mark's ambition and deceit. "He lied to you too," Sarah said. It wasn't an absolution, just a statement of fact. A tear slipped down Chloe's cheek. He lied about everything. After the hearing, it all fell apart. The job, the apartment, the money. It was all a sham. I moved back home with my parents. I'm working as a waitress and taking classes at the community college, trying to figure out who I actually am, not who I was trying to be. She finally met Sarah's eyes. "I hope you and your daughter are happy. You deserve it." "We are," Sarah said softly, "and I hope you find what you're looking for, Chloe." As Chloe walked away, Sarah felt a final heavy knot in her chest loosen. Forgiveness wasn't about condoning what Chloe had done. It was about releasing herself from the burden of carrying that anger. It was about acknowledging the shared humanity, however flawed, in another person's journey. Sarah's own path was not about finding a new partner or erasing the past. It was about integrating it. The scars Mark had left were a part of her story, a testament to her resilience. They reminded her of the strength she didn't know she had, the ferocity of her own love for her child. That evening, as she and Lily planted the tulip and daffodil bulbs in the cool earth of their garden, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. They worked together, their hands covered in dirt, planning the colors that would erupt in the spring. "It's like we're burying little treasures, Mommy," Lily said, carefully placing a bulb in its hole. "It is, sweet pea," Sarah replied, smiling, "and we'll have to be patient and wait for them to grow. But when they do, it's going to be beautiful." She realized that's what she had been doing all along, planting bulbs of hope and strength in the dark, cold ground of her past, trusting that, with time and care, something beautiful would bloom. Her redemption wasn't a destination she had arrived at. It was the soil under her fingernails, the daughter laughing beside her, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that she was, finally and completely, home. The courtroom is a battlefield where lives are dismantled and rebuilt, but sometimes the most powerful weapon is a simple truth. Sarah's fight wasn't just against a man, but against a web of lies designed to erase her. Her victory reminds us that true strength isn't about wealth or power, but about the fierce, unyielding love that can withstand any storm. It's a story of resilience, of a mother's bond that cannot be broken, and the quiet courage it takes to reclaim your own narrative. If Sarah's journey from betrayal to triumph moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button and sharing this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more powerful stories of justice, resilience, and the ultimate victory of the human spirit.